सतनाम श्री वाहे गुरु
सतनाम श्री वाहे
नानक आया कल तारन गुरु नानक आया
नानक आया कल तारन गुरु नानक आया
नानक आया कल तारन गुरु नानक आया
नानक आया कल तारन गुरु नानक आया चलो चल रल मिल दर्शन करिए सतगुरु नानक आए ने चलो चल रल मिल दर्शन करिए सतगुरु नानक आए ने
चलो चल पगसागर मिल तरिए कल युग तारन आए ने
चलो चल पौसागर मिल तरिए कल युग तारन आए ने
सतगुरु नानक आए ने सतगुरु
Many people know
नानक
Peter is the director for our Center for Interreligious Dialogue, and Peter has put a lot of work into making this event possible behind the scenes and working with Dr. Puri as well. So Peter, thanks very much for your work and making today happen and for your commitment to interreligious dialogue and engagement. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Peter, who's going to introduce some things that are going to be happening for today.
So again, I couldn't do a better job than Brad did, and so I'm just going to very briefly just tell you what's going to happen today. And all of you should have a little printout of the event, so I'm not going to throw any curveballs, it's a baseball term, but in your life. So just so you see, we're going to have short little introductions, okay? Dr. Puri, he will give us a short little talk about the 5 Ks in personal ethics. Okay, and of course we're deeply grateful for Dr. Gurnam Singh coming over from the UK and giving us a talk about what this day is about ultimately, and who is Guru Nanak, right, and the 550th anniversary / celebration of his birth. So without further ado, Dr. Puri, please come up.
Greeting is Sat Shri Akal and Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Sat Shri Akal means truth is the God, and the God is the truth. And Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh means Khalsa belongs to the Lord, the God, Vaheguru we call him. And he is the winner always. Through Khalsa, and Khalsa, if he believes in that one, will be the winner all the time. And we are giving that winning credit to the God. It's that love. Other quality of a social person is kindness and generosity towards others. Our Granth lays emphasis on mercy, which is regarded as mother of dharma, and the sister quality of the mercy is tolerance. Kabir says, "Jahan gyan ta dharma hai, jahan jhoot ta paap, jahan lobh ta kal hai, jahan khima ta aap." Where there is a knowledge and wisdom, there is a piety. Where there is a falsehood, there is a sin. Where there is a greed, there is death. Where there is tolerance, there is God himself. When we pardon somebody, the God is standing in between. It's the duty of the state or king to take care of the poor and the destitute. Rulers should try for democratic principles. The ruler who submits before ideals, his rule is lasting. Raja takht ke guni bahai panchayan ra. Only that king will survive who will look after his people. If he's not looking after the people, that king cannot survive. That democracy cannot survive if the governments and others, they do not look after their people of the state. That's why there's a change of, even in the democratic, so many people change. I think I have taken enough. Humility is my aim. Anything I might have oversaid, pardon me for that. I request your pardon, and I hope we are able to pass the message of Sikhism to you on this one. Accept the will of the God and accept the nature. We are the lovers of the nature. That's why in our last slok of Chapchi Sahib, Guru said, Pavan Guru, Pani Pita, Mata Tat Mahato. We have given importance to the earth, that is the mother. Air is the Guru, and water is the primal life. And we also say, Balihari Kutadvasya. That means God resides in the nature. We have to protect the nature. This is the time of the nature to protect. Guru Nanak has said, Professor Gurnam Singh will speak over it, you know, what are his further plans, you know, in the nature of what happens. You know.
Hey, good morning everybody, to our visitors. And it's a great pleasure today to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Gurnam Singh, who joins us from Coventry University, where he is Associate Professor of Inclusion and Attainment. Professor Gurnam Singh is a sociologist of education and an academic activist. Prior to entering academia, the professor worked as a social worker in his native Bradford, the Wool City of Yorkshire. He completed his PhD on anti-racist social work in 2004 at the University of Warwick. Professor Singh is his academic work is multidisciplinary in its nature, touching on race, culture, politics, ethics, social justice, social work, and educational policy and practice. So everything that's interesting, if you think about it. His extensive publications testify to this breadth of research. Professor Singh is also a visiting fellow in race and education at the University of the Arts in London and visiting professor of social work at the University of Chester. Dr. Singh's commitment to universal education and service and the transformation of societies and individuals finds expression also in his extensive media work over the last decade, primarily on the Sikh channel and the Akal channel. Professor Singh's contribution to higher education was recognised by the UK Higher Education Academy with the award of a National Teaching Fellowship. Professor Singh's keynote paper today is entitled Celebrating the 550th Birthday of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, Deepening Knowledge of Sikhism. So please join me in saying Ji Ayanu and welcome to Professor Dr. Gurnam Singh.
Thank you for that warm welcome. I am indeed honoured to have been given this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts about Guru Nanak, his life and his teaching. I would like to thank Dr. Puri as well, who actually invited me, asked me if I'd come across, and for his efforts in putting this event on today. I'd like to thank Dr. Brad Anderson and the School of Theology, Philosophy and Music for hosting this event, and I'd like to thank the students for coming. I think without students we're nothing. I keep telling the university management, the frontline staff and the students are the university, but they still don't listen. I'd like to thank Peter as well, Peter, Amin, and all the team here at the Centre for Interreligious Dialogue at Dublin City University. And all throughout this year, we have and will be seeing lots of these kinds of gatherings where both Sikhs, but non-Sikhs as well, there'll be interfaith gatherings, will be celebrating in various guises the 550th anniversary of Guru Nanak. There'll be huge gatherings at his birthplace in Nanak, which is in the Punjab. I wish I had a map here, but they're in the Punjab, on the Pakistan side of the border of Punjab. And he was born in 1469 at a place called Nankana. He actually spent most of his childhood at a place called Sultanpur Lodi, which is on the Indian side of the border of Punjab, where he spent his childhood. There are many stories linked to his time as a child and how he himself became enlightened. But there will also be a really big gathering at a place called Kartarpur, which again, it almost straddles the border between India and Pakistan. It's a very sensitive region in the world, you know, two nuclear powers facing each other, and the Sikhs are smack bang in the middle of that. So, but if there is a conflict, then certainly the Punjab will be obliterated. And that is always a source of tension because we have families back there. And Kartarpur is also a place of hope because it's bringing the two nations together. You know, there's a lot of huge developments taking place there. And I'll mention Kartarpur because he spent the last 20 years of his life there, and the kind of society he established, yeah? But perhaps the most significant aspect of the celebration is that for the first time, I think in my knowledge, that Guru Nanak is becoming recognised by non-Sikhs, which is a tragedy because Nanak never wanted to be confined to any one community or ethnicity or region. In fact, his own life was to demonstrate that actually humanity is what really matters. Now, I've developed some of these things as well. Just recently, just as an illustration of this embrace of Nanak by non-Sikhs, I was at the in July at the World Council of Churches in Geneva, where they actually had an event commemorating the 550th. I spoke there, which is phenomenal, that the economical centre of one great world faith will celebrate the birth of a founder of another faith. And I think that very much is in keeping with Nanak's own teaching. And I think that in some senses, I think Nanak would have actually seen the coming together of people of different faiths, not the obliteration of identity, because I think what makes the world and existence wonderful is the fact that we are all different, yeah? You know, 7 colours of the rainbow, yeah? It's more than 7, but we kind of see 7. But also, if you think about it, what happens when those 7 colours come together? What colour do we get? Yeah, white. Actually, white's not a colour. It's almost like the absence of colour. So when those colours come together, we obliterate what you might call duality, yeah? We obliterate the sense that we are different when we bring them together. It's amazing, isn't it? How nature itself teaches about these things. And I think Nanak would very much see that. For Nanak, there is no other. And one of the things I'll be talking about is that, you know, how do we escape the sense of otherness, of the stranger, yeah? I think the other important thing is that this is the Centre for Interreligious Dialogue at DCU, and again, Nanak's method of teaching, and you know, Nanak was first and foremost a teacher, was dialogue. He never preached anywhere. He never preached. He engaged in dialogue. So I think that it's, you know, very prescient, appropriate that this session is being held here today at this centre, and we will have some dialogue later on. So who is Nanak then? You know, he's essentially a traveller. He's on a journey, and we're all on a journey, yeah. And there are essentially 2 kind of journeys that Nanak is travelling. There's an external journey, and that external journey takes him to to many countries in the world. Roughly 40,000 miles Nanak travelled by foot in a 25-year period. So he's travelling, physically travelling, but he's also travelling inside himself, yeah? So he's on a journey, external journey, but also an internal journey. And I think that's really important. It's the essence of Nanak's philosophy, is the sense that there is an external world, which is a real world, which isn't a false world, yeah? Which isn't a polluted world that somehow we have to escape from. But there's also an internal world as well that we need to engage with, you know, with ourselves. So I'd say he's seen as the founder of the Sikh faith, although he himself would not have been, he wouldn't even claim that he founded a religion. I'm not sure that Christ would have claimed that he was there to found a religion either. Religions tend to be the institutional embodiment of certain processes that often take place after the prophet or the founder or whoever. But he certainly wasn't setting out there to found a religion. In fact, he said that there is no Hindu or Muslim, yeah? Where there is truth, there can only be truth. So this is an interesting tension that we get between his own vision and then where Sikhs now have become an institutionalized community, yeah, with its own rituals, if you like. And there's always a tension between the two. But well, let's focus on Nanak for the beginning. Just to say something about so Sikh itself, and you know, how does the word Sikh emerge? And it's probably because the people who were following became his students, and Sikh essentially means student. Yeah, it's from the Sanskrit, from Sishya or Shikarti, which is mean either a learner, Shikarti, or Shishya, to learn, from the Sanskrit origin. So that's essentially what a Sikh is, somebody who follows Nanak as the teacher. Okay? Another interesting thing is that his name itself is from a Sanskrit origin, Na-anek. Now, anek means many, yeah? It means many, infinitely many, anek. Na is then the opposite of that. So when you put a prefix, it means na-anek. And what is the opposite of na-anek? one, yeah? So the opposite of many is one, isn't it? So interestingly, his name itself means one. And that's where his whole kind of philosophical, theological project begins, is with oneness. And it ends with oneness. Now, I'll kind of expand on that a bit more. We know about his life through his own scriptures, and he made notes. He was a bit like kind of an anthropologist. You know, on his journeys, he would make notes, and he would dialogue, and he would take wisdom. In fact, quite a lot of the wisdom of the Sufi saints who predate Nanak, you know, from the kind of 12th century. Nanak collates that, and then that later appears in the Sikh scripture. So he didn't say, you know, what label are you? He wasn't interested in labels, he was interested in wisdom. And he was interested in the love that accompanied that wisdom. So we know about his the writings that he collated, but there are also what's called Janamsakhis. These are stories, they were oral traditions in those days. So these would be stories that were narrated, and then, you know, people would record them. And so we have Janamsakhis that do give us something. But we also can triangulate that with actual places where he visited, and there are physical evidence of him visited, you know, up to including going to Mecca, going to Iraq, Iran, across the world. He went to the known world in those days, yeah, from Sri Lanka down the south, into China, into the east and the west. It is suggested that he even visited Rome, although there's still kind of evidence to be unearthed. There have been some dialogues with the Pope, and as you can imagine, the vaults of the Vatican are pretty big, but who knows? There are some suggestions that he visited Africa as well. So he, whether he did or not, this is what he embodies. This person is trying to reach out to all the major faiths and to engage with them and to dialogue with them. So there are essentially three periods of his life. There's an early period, a contemplative period, from childhood, where he's kind of discovering himself. And also, he's also in tension. You know, like young children are. You're in tension with your parents. Your parents want you to do X and you want to do Y, or even your school teachers, yeah? So he was a rebellion, he was a rebel. And he was challenging the kind of received wisdom that he was supposed to take on. So that's the first period. Now, I've just mentioned something about that. The second one is this, what you could call the mystic enlightenment period, where he, as I say, on his travels, dialogues with people of different faiths, and how that itself becomes an important part of his unfolding of his message. And then there's a third period, which is when he kind of retires, really, and he goes to Kartarpur. And what he does in Kartarpur is he tries to embody the kind of ideology, the faith, the theology, if you like, into a practical society. So he tries to create an ideal society, a Kartarpur, yeah? So as a child, Nanak was working, and maybe it was child labour. He used to work in a shop in Sultanpur, as I said, which is a small town between Lahore and Delhi. His mind was mostly preoccupied with spiritual matters, and he spent long hours in meditation, which what we call Nam Simran, and singing. He loved singing. In fact, that was his method of communicating, sing. So all of his writings are in the form of musical poems, poetry, and musical form. So he used to sing, and everywhere he sang. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You know, if you kind of go into a strange place, if you start shouting at somebody, they'll probably attack you. But if you start singing, they'll probably sit down and start listening, yeah? So that method obviously works. Maybe we should start singing our lectures in universities. That's what we're doing. Now, you have to have a voice to sing, yeah? Anyway, his mind was mostly preoccupied with spiritual matters in those early days. And as I say, he was looking for meaning in life. In fact, his family members thought that he'd gone crazy, that he was mentally disturbed. Probably brought in the equivalent of the child psychologist to find out what's wrong with Nanak, because he was challenging all the kind of basic norms that were given to him. So he challenged the priest. Because he was born into a Khatri Brahmin family, which was like the high caste Brahmins. a child is expected to go through this ritual, which is to put the thread, yeah? It's a kind of like a religious, bit like a kind of baptism. And he rejected that. And he said, look, you know, I don't want to be engaging in rituals. He says that if you've got a string that can give me, that never breaks, that is about love, about compassion, about contentment, about detachment, if you can give me that, make me a thread that kind of never breaks ever, then give it to me. But if you can't, then I'm not interested. So he begins to challenge these kinds of external rituals. And he said, look, if they're empty of substance, then they become actually problematic. But his first spiritual, you could say, revelation was the Mool Mantra that Dr. Puri earlier on mentioned. So I'm not going to go into that, which actually, if you read the Guru Granth, the Sikh Holy Scripture, it's the first verse of the Holy Scripture. And it begins with one. Ik. Ik is one. Okay? Ik Omkar. Now, if you read the text, it'll say that means God is one. That's actually an Abrahamic kind of monotheistic way of looking at things, yeah? He rejects his polytheism, which was the kind of Vedantic worldview of lots and lots of gods. But what he says, so he's not really interested in whether there's one God or lots of gods. He's saying that there is just oneness of everything, yeah? So Ik Onkar doesn't mean God is one, it means all is one. There's a sense that everything becomes part of that oneness. And remember earlier on I talked about that Nanak is interested in avoiding duality and splitting off, and also otherness, yeah? So you can really only kind of do that if you have a philosophical kind of worldview that actually we are not separate, yeah? That we are not separate from each other. Nanak's not just talking about that at a kind of spiritual level, but he's also saying that actually our origins are the same. And it's true, isn't it, if you think about it, if those of you who believe in the kind of scientific Big Bang theory, you know, it all comes from the singularity, yeah? Everything comes from the one. So all is one is the proclamation. And if all is one, then God is all, and we are all, and then God is we, yeah? There's a sense that we are not separate from God. It's a bit like, if you think about, it's a bit like an analogy, if you think about God as being the ocean, and then you get a jug and you take a bit of the ocean into a jug. Now, is the ocean in the jug? Is that the ocean? Who thinks that is the ocean? Who thinks it isn't the ocean? It's kind of confusing, isn't it? Because it's part of the ocean. What about, say, an acorn and the oak tree? You know, the acorn, the oak tree is the oak tree the acorn? Is the oak tree the acorn? Or is the paradise bird, the beautiful bird, the egg? It kind of is and it isn't. Does that make sense? And that's what Nanak's talking about. He's saying that we think of these things as separate. We separate out, but actually the source is the same. And if we can see the source of the same, we can avoid duality. So that was an important, in a sense, that is the rest of the Sikh scripture, 1430 pages, is an exposition, exegesis of this basic principle of the oneness of everything. He went on his travels towards the east, south, west, and north, and he visited all the major centers of faith of Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Jainism, Sufism, the yogis and the siddhas. As I say, it suggests that he did try to get to Rome. Whether he got there is a different question. But he no doubt met people of different faith traditions, and that was part of his mission. He wanted not to meet people who he was familiar with. He wanted to get engaged in interfaith dialogue. He met people of different tribes and cultures, of different racial backgrounds, and he engaged in dialogue. And, you know, he encountered leaders as well, political leaders, rulers. And, you know, I could spend the rest of the talk just talking about those encounters they had with political rulers as well. The Mughal emperor, Babur, who was the emperor at the time, arrested him because he spoke out against the oppression that they were committing. He called them dogs, and for that he got imprisoned. When he went to Baghdad, and Baghdad was a very big centre, the ruler of Baghdad, who was somebody called Bilal Shah Dastagir, he ordered him to be stoned, and then afterwards he engaged in a dialogue with Nanak, and then he himself becomes totally transformed, yeah? So he had this method of but he started off by singing, and that would attract people's attention, yeah? So he'd have, and he had a companion with him all 25 years of travel, which was somebody called Bhai Mardana. Mardana is like a musician, Rababi. He used to play Rabab. It's like a kind of a lute, early music, it's kind of one of these, a lute. And so they used to go together. So this is insignificant that he was a Muslim. Not only was Mardana a Muslim, he was from what you would call the lowest caste, that the musicians were deemed to be the low castes. And of course Nanak and that was another very powerful symbolic message that my life partner, and he called him Bhai Mardana, my brother, is a Muslim, yeah? So he rejects the thread, he rejects the caste system, but not just verbally, he actually then lives a different egalitarian life. So he's engaging in dialogue. So much of his writings are in the form of a question and answer. So like kind of a Socratic dialogue, if you like, yeah? Although he's not interested in pure logic or reason, yeah? For Nanak, the head is as important as the heart. And it's to try and bring the head and the heart, and if you like, the hands as well. So he offers a kind of what you might call a kind of practical social spirituality. And because of that, he rejected the idea that you renounce the world, yeah? That you go into a cave or a monastery or into the mountains. He went and had dialogues with, for example, the yogis who were sitting in the mountains, meditating, and some of them claiming to be of having miraculous powers, miracles and magic. And he challenged them and questioned them. And he said, actually, if you have got these powers and you're not doing anything for society, then what use is your spirituality, yeah? So he again is challenging them to engage. And so he very much emphasized the social life, what we call Grist Jivan. And therefore he himself was married. He had children. And he had children who were disobedient. That's the other interesting thing about that. Both of his children, both of his sons, refused to follow his teachings. Actually, in fact, were following contradictory teachings. So even Nanak had the problem of adolescent and children. So don't worry about if you have those problems. And those young people who are a bit adolescent, don't worry about that. That's natural. It's good to be adolescent. You'll grow out of it. Yeah? So what was Nanak's mission then? Yeah, he had a very simple philosophy, and he said that life is about achieving balance. We call that Sahaj Avastha. This sense of equilibrium, if you like, equipoise. And we do, don't we? When people we see somebody who, if they get insulted, they're still kind of calm. If somebody praises them, they're still pretty calm, yeah? We have this sense of balance, yeah? He said that's the kind of basic spiritual path, is to reach a stage of balance in your life. And everything else comes from that. And for Nanak, a bit like Aristotle, if you've done Aristotle, you know that Aristotle talks about how, different objects have forms, that they're so like, what makes a table, yeah? Everything has a form, yeah? And similarly, we all have a meaning, we have a purpose. Just like a table has a purpose. Humans have a purpose, animals have a purpose, different species have a purpose. Yeah? We all have, for Nanak, all forms have a purpose. And so the question then for us is, what is our purpose in the human form? We might discuss this afterwards. What are we born for? We know what maybe a table is there for, yeah? It's to put your laptop on it. What is a human being for? And so he says that the point is to live out our purpose. And that's how God will be happy. So when we disrupt our purpose, then we disrupt the natural order, if you like. Yeah, we disrupt the equilibrium, and therefore we are disrupting God's intention. A good example might be obesity, yeah? Overeating. You know, when you've ate too much, what does your body say to you? It says you're full, yeah? And you might even throw up. Now, think about that. So there comes a point when your body says, actually, you are now not living out your purpose, yeah? I mean, that's an absurd example, but do you get what I'm getting at? And so Nanak says, recognize your purpose. And one of the things he says, you are the embodiment, Mantu Jyotsrupa. As a human being, you are the embodiment of the divine. So recognize the divinity within inside you. So that's all he's asking people. He's not asking anybody to convert or to follow whatever path. He says, follow whatever path you want to follow. But in doing so, recognize your purpose. And that's important. So for Nanak, the creator, we don't actually have a name for, I mean, we use the word God because that's kind of become a universal descriptor, but it presupposes certain assumptions about, what this thing is. Actually, Nanak doesn't give it a name. It says it's nameless. And then he says it is the embodiment of Sattva, which is the embodiment of universality or timelessness, yeah? And I think that this is the sense that it's permanent. Sattva is permanent, it's timeless and universal. He felt that human beings, by virtue of superior intellect and our capacity to think, imagine and create, and to take a model stance. You know, when a lion kills an animal and eats it, is it behaving immorally? Hand up if you think that lion's behaving immorally. Is it model? Is it behaving morally? So if you think that the lion's... So what if it kills two, it has one and has its meal and then it kills another one? Is that immoral? A lion will only kill if it's threatened or if it's hungry. So it's neither model or amoral, it just lives out its purpose, yes? But he says human beings are so different from all other forms is that we have the capacity to make moral choices, yeah? And therefore we have the capacity to make immoral choices. So when I overeat, in effect, I'm making a self-conscious decision to do something that's not right for my body. And also, if that's why, animals are not greedy. Animals just respond to their needs. Human beings, even though we might have enough food, that we will want to accumulate more and more, yeah? So Nanak was very interested and very keen for us to see our intellect as part of the divine gift that we have, Manukhi Janam, our intellect. And that's why he says, God resides in your intellect. Yeah, the divine resides in your intellect. But you have to recognize that. And when you recognize that, then you can live a model life. So what is Nanak's view about God? As I said, he rejects this traditional view of God. In classical theism, yeah, all-knowing, all-powerful, omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, yes? All-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God. There's certainly, an acceptance of those properties, but Nanak rejects the idea of a God that is separate from ourselves, yes? It's a bit like remember that I said about the ocean? And it says that if God is the ocean, then we are a drop of the ocean. We are God, and that's the relationship. So he rejects a God that is sat on the cloud, if you like, kind of metaphorically speaking. A God that sits in judgment, and then when we die, then he kind of, a bit like exam, does your exam paper, you fail, you pass. So there's no heaven and hell in Sikhism. When you get into that state of sage, that state of consciousness, of equilibrium, that's when you make that connection between the drop that you are of the ocean and the ocean, yeah? It's a realization that you belong to something bigger. When you get to that point, then you become enlightened. You reach that point at which life and death makes no meaning, has no meaning, yeah? So in that sense, we don't believe in an afterlife, okay? And anyway, the point of Sat, this timeless, universal singularity of oneness, there is no past, present, or future, yeah? It just becomes this one point. And so if there's no past, present, and future, then you can't talk about an afterlife. For Nanak, God is always manifest in nature. Dr. Puri talked about, Nanak saying, Pavan Guru Pani Pitamata Tatamata. He says that the air is God. Yeah, Pavan Guru Pani, and the water is your father, and the earth is your mother. So he's saying that all of these things are part of what you call an ecology of divinity, if you like. The material, the physical world is part of this bigger kind of ecology. He went on to a place called Jagannath Puri, Orissa, which is on the eastern side of India. And it's a big center for Hinduism, Jagannath Puri, yeah? And he had an encounter, a dialogue with the Pandits, the Hindu Brahmins there, who there they do this, I don't know if you've ever seen this Hindu ceremony where they light the candles on a tray, yeah, it's called the Arti, and they perform these rituals. And the priest says to Nanak, well, hey, you perform this ritual. And he refused to perform it. Then they said to him, why aren't you performing it? He says, well, why should I reduce? Because it's supposed to represent, it's an embodiment of God and light and things. He looks up into the sky and he says, Gagan mein tha rav chandi bane tar ka mandal janak murti. Tu mane ala pavan chavlo kare sakal bhai fudan jyoti. He says, the sky is your platter, the tray is the sky. The sun and the moon are the lamps, the lights, the candles. The stars in the sky are the pearls. And the incense is the fragrance in the air from the wind. The whole forest is your flower. So what he's saying is, nature is its own ritual. Yeah, nature, it has its own dance. And let's focus on that, rather than, as it were, trying to, if you like, commodify nature, take it, put it into some kind of small product. So he rejects a lot of these rituals, and he said, look, do the ritual, but if the ritual then disconnects you from the true essence of being, then it becomes problematic, yeah? So I'm just going to come to a conclusion, because I'd like to leave time for dialogue. There's a lot more that I could have talked about, talked about women's equality. That was a pretty brave thing to do in those days, 500 years ago, to say that women are equal to men. And and he did not just proclaim that, he actually then established women priests. We talk about in the enlightened West that we're still struggling to have women priests, and he did that. That's not to say that his project was successful. In fact, it hasn't been successful because of the traditions and the kind of the power of the dominant kind of forces. But nonetheless, I think if you go into a Sikh temple, a Gurdwara, you'll find women performing the services just as men do. Yeah, there's no distinction whatsoever. So when I think of Nanak and the momentous challenge he took on to travel on foot across the known world, to take on rulers and priests, to question 3,000-year-old belief systems in what it must have been a pretty dangerous terrain full of wild animals as well. We're talking about India 550 years ago. Can you imagine what would have been like? With jungles everywhere, yeah? And tigers and lions and roaming around everywhere. And all he had was a stick. You'll see pictures of him with a stick, and that probably was to protect himself from the wild animals. And he was accompanied by his lifelong companion, Bhai Madana, a musician. Hardly somebody who was going to protect you, with his guitar or whatever. What was it that enabled him to succeed? I asked that question. I reflect, what was it that he managed to then travel to so many places and not get killed, and to succeed in his mission? You could argue, and I would, that he was divinely blessed. I think that there was some divine intervention, but it was his simplicity, I think, and his ability to engage with strangers, to build bridges across different cultural traditions. For me, that was the key to that success. He was not threatening wherever he went. He didn't even threaten. In fact, he was so loving that people who held opposite views to maybe what he was suggesting changed their view. Guru Nanak as a poet remains unequaled. He's not only profound and prolific, but also most diverse. The number of genres he wrote in or created is simply stunning. He employed expressions of salok, of vaz, of kafi, baramaha. There are so many other traditions, from particularly the Northern Indian poetic tradition, that Nanak deploys in his writings. In his Siddhghosh, Bahir, etc. Sithiyan, he takes a lot of folk traditions and writes poems on those. And above all, this isn't exhaustive. He himself, at the same time, he was this great orator, this great writer, this great thinker. Yet he also at the same time says he's nothing. He's illiterate in his writings, always saying those things. In fact, he wrote in one of his hymns, he said, Tanna so kagad, kalam tanna, panda tan mas, tan likhari nanaka, jin naam likhaya sach. He says, praise be the paper, praise be the pen, praise be the pot, praise be the ink, praise be the writer who writes the truth. So he was interested in truth, but not truth in the sense of this person telling a lie and this third person telling the truth, or in like evidential truth in court. But he was interested in a universal truth. He says, I'm only interested in those things that are relevant for all human beings, all species. So it's back to that sense of oneness. And as I said, his name itself, Na and Nek, represents from duality, from lot to the one. And I think that's his gift to humanity, to existence, is that we all become one. And when we become one, and it's not just become one with each other, but becoming one with nature, with the ecosystem, with nations and peoples and faiths, then I think we can find solutions to the problems that we face. Thank you for listening. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa.
But I think it's really good for those burning questions or just clarifications while it's fresh in our mind. Because the one thing, just for myself, sometimes we fall back on examples of people that we want to hold up, right? So we might say, oh, Mother Teresa, Francis of Assisi, Gandhi has sort of trickled into, I'd say, the Christian worldview of examples. But the more I learn about Guru Nanak, it's why haven't I gone to that example more often? And I think, today, for many of you, if this was the first time you heard about him, you're probably thinking something similar because of how just open he was to so many different ideas and cultures, and really that ethical core. And I think this is why an event like today is so important, and Professor Singh bringing that human side out, because I didn't know, for example, I have as you guys know, some of my own older children at that adolescent age. And it's even having a connection with a holy figure like that, who also had to deal with very real things. And that also provides a nice link with some of us as well. So just to kind of open the floor up.
Very good. Thanks very much for a fascinating talk there. I'm just wondering, could you say something about the kind of relationship between Sikhism and Punjabi identity?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, you must have been reading my thoughts, because I wasn't actually...
Repeat the question again, please.
What is the connection between Punjabi identity, the Punjab, and Sikhism? Yeah. Now, Nanak is a son of the Punjab, just like Christ is the son of Palestine or Jerusalem or whatever. Yeah, and that's a fact. He himself, he was very interested in the proletarian, the people on the ground. He wasn't interested in the kind of priests. Again, I think, similar as with Christ, Christ in the temple, challenges the kind of priests who are charging money for people to enter the temple, yeah? You find in the Reformation as well, you find similar tensions around how the priestly class. So Nanak challenges the priestly class. Not only, and he does that hegemony, he he challenges even the language that they use, because Sanskrit was the language, the exclusive language of the priestly class. Just as suspecting this neck of the world, Latin and Greek would have been the kind of language, yeah? So, and he creates a new language. It's called Gurmukhi, which is a kind of very simple proletarian language, and it is the language of the Punjab, yeah, Gurmukhi, Punjabi language. And he's also, as I said, trying to get together writings which are mostly in Punjabi, but not only in Punjabi. You know, as I say, he's writing in other languages as well. So it's not as if he's purist about this, but he clearly identified with the, and you know, after his travels, he comes back to live back in the Punjab. But his early followers were not Punjabis, and that's the other kind of, in a sense, wherever he went, he left a mark. So if you go to, say, Sri Lanka, you know, we used to be called Ceylon in the colonial times, the king of Lanka became his follower and gave Nanak, gave thousands of acres of land. So even today, if you go down to Sri Lanka, there are thousands of acres of land to Nanak. In fact, in other places that would happen. The kings would give, he said, use it for social purposes. Sikhs, his early followers were called Nanak Panthis, which was kind of followers of Nanak. Yeah, they claimed themselves to be Nanak Panthis. They came from all traditions. If you go to parts of, like in Afghanistan, huge Sikh community that originated from those times. In Sindh, in Pakistan, they wouldn't outwardly appear as Sikhs. And in fact, they might appear as Muslims or as tribesmen. But they all kind of, and if you go into kind of the mountains in the north as well, you'll find the lamas, the Buddhists, lamas have temples devoted to, and they call him Nanak Lama. So in sense, Nanak has been appropriated in other traditions that are non-Punjabi, as well as the Punjabi tradition that kind of, as it were, offers the most comprehensive account of Nanak. But that's part of the tragedy, I think, is that Nanak doesn't really belong to the Punjab. He kind of belongs to everybody, you know. But we all come from somewhere, don't we? And we live somewhere. Yes, and we have.
I know that in sort of moderately recent history, Sikhs have been sort of targeted and persecuted at different times in India, and I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about sort of the interreligious fabric of India and where Sikhism fits into that now.
So. Sikhism became a social movement, yeah? It was never supposed to become a religion, it was a social movement. And it has different periods in its life, and there is a period after our sixth Guru, the fifth Guru got martyred by the Mughal emperor at the time. He got killed for daring to challenge the authorities, yeah? And so his son then became, he took on the warrior and he formed armies, and so Sikhs then became a kind of a, I don't know, I'm sure there are examples, a bit like maybe a crusades or whatever, although there's a different history there. So the Sikhs then began to fight the armed struggle. So there've always been this tension with rulers who have maybe been oppressive. And, you know, I don't want to get into politics now, but there is certainly, today there's a real worry that in India we have Hindutva, Hindu nationalist project, which is denying the rights of minorities in India. And the Sikhs are certainly there at the forefront of that. A good example would be what's happening in Kashmir at the moment, where the Sikhs across India have been physically protecting Kashmiri students who have felt threatened by this and actually taking them back. So there is that kind of tradition of Sikhs to always stand with the oppressed. And because of that, then rulers and governments are always going to see them as a bit of a threat. There are other periods where Sikhs themselves have ruled as well, so it's not as if Sikhs cannot themselves be oppressive, and that's why I think you know, we've got to be vigilant, not just outside but inwardly as well, in terms of, you know, fighting. But those principles are there. That's probably why we're allowed to wear turbans, because even coming into Western countries, we didn't take no for an answer. We campaigned, and in Britain, Sikhs got the rules on them requiring people to wear crash helmets on motorbikes changed, so Sikhs have an exemption. So if you want to travel around without a hash helmet, then put on a turban. But you've got to prove that you're a proper Sikh and not just a convenience, yeah? So I think that's part, and Dr. Puri talks about one of our 5Ks is the sword. And the sword is symbolic of fighting injustice. You know, we're not a Sikh if we don't stand up to fight injustice anywhere and everywhere. So yeah, I mean that's kind of it, and we will do in India today because it's very worrying times, and we will find injustice anywhere else as well. Sikhs fought against fascism in the wars. They sacrificed tens of thousands. Most of our ancestors, if we look at most of the Sikhs here, their ancestors, their parents were military people, fought in the British, for the British, against the British, did everything. So, you know, at the time of independence, we had half the Sikhs fighting for the Indian National Liberation Army in Japan against the British, and the other half fighting wars for the British. So the Sikhs kind of fought everywhere, just to make sure they're not your enemies, that's all.
Has there ever been, throughout history, a movement to found something like a state?
State? Yeah. Well, the Sikhs, of course, did have a state. They had the Sikhs had an empire for 50 years under the ruler who was Ranjit Singh, Punjab. Okay, and in fact, Sikhs fought two wars against the British, the Anglo-Sikh wars, 2 wars against the British, and the Punjab was annexed because of betrayals, and the British were very good at that. Yeah, the British were very good at, you know, and so they managed to get some Sikhs to betray, and then they annexed the Punjab. So the Sikhs lost their empire. And you can look this up. 50 years under Ranjit Singh, the Sikh empire in Punjab, it was a huge land. There was 95% literacy, so education was not just for men but for girls as well. He abolished the death penalty, and you know, so it was in some sense a very liberal kind of rule. Napoleon's generals who had lost in Waterloo came, and because they didn't like the British either, so the Sikhs have got this love-hate relationship with the British. We love them, but it's a bit like the Irish, really, isn't it? Yeah, we love them, but we also, you know, reserve the right to take them on when we want to. There has been a movement. In 1984, we had the storming of the Golden Temple in Amritsar. There was a movement for an independent Sikh state. I think that was a desperate move by Sikhs because they felt if we're going to be, you know, a bit like what's happening to the Palestinians, maybe in the Middle East, you know, who else can protect us? And you know that's still going on, and they're making a case for that. You know? It's a kind of a nation without states. Sometimes the Sikhs are called a nation without states. Yeah, a bit like the Jews, really. I guess that would be the most equivalent. And you know, and therefore one of the rationales for establishing Israel was to protect Judaism, and there's a similar kind of currents among Sikhs as well.
Please give Professor Singh a warm round of applause.
चलो चल रल मिल दर्शन करिए सतगुरु नानक आए ने चलो चल भवसागर मिल करिए कलयुग तारन आए ने चलो चल रल मिल दर्शन करिए सतगुरु